Imagine the hot sun on your skin. Your stomach is full of delicious food and you've been dancing the day away. But the party isn't over. The streets are full of people and food trucks. Tomorrow morning, you'll be awoken by the sounds of the ocean and a new party in the streets will begin. You are in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Welcome to Window Seat, the podcast for young travelers to get the rundown on great trip destinations. I'm your host, Julianna Beauvais, and today we are taking a journey to one of America's favorite islands, the beautiful and historic San Juan, Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is located in the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea south of Florida. One of the most popular spots to visit in Puerto Rico is San Juan. It's a city on the northeast side of the island. It's a perfect mix of history, nature, and adventure. To get to the city of San Juan, I flew from my home city of Philadelphia to Florida, and then from Florida to San Juan. A direct flight will be about 5 hours from my location. I paid $250 for the flight, which at the time was on the cheaper side, actually. But I just looked at the prices currently with COVID, and the price for a ticket right now is about $40, which is pretty crazy. But on average, you're looking around like $300. Sometimes less, sometimes a little bit more. After my flight landed, when I arrived in Puerto Rico, I got an Uber from the airport to my Airbnb. I usually prefer Lyft, but Lyft at the time wasn't operating in Puerto Rico, so I had the choice of a taxi or Uber. I personally like to do the Uber more than taxis if I can, because you have the price agreed upon before you even get into the car. Versus with taxis, you don't know until you get to your destination, and it could be pretty pricey. When I arrived at my Airbnb, I spent a lot of time just getting settled and exploring the place because it was a pretty interesting Airbnb that I had. I had picked to stay in a shared Airbnb, which means I had my own private room, but the rest of the place was shared with other Airbnb guests, which I didn't mind at all. The guests were really nice and considerate, and the place was clean, so it wasn't a problem at all. And it also gives you the opportunity to meet some other travelers, which is always fun. The place was perfectly decorated. It had a lot of rooms. It had a kitchen, 2 different living rooms, a dining room, a couple bathrooms, and my favorite part was the rooftop garden and sitting area. It was like huge rooftop, and it was absolutely beautiful to sit out there at the night and potentially watch the sunset and just hang out and relax after the day. In this episode, I'm going to be going over some of the must-sees of Puerto Rico. And keep in mind that I was only able to get to a couple of the things in the short time that I was there. There are a million amazing things to do and see on this island, but I'm just going to highlight some of my favorites. So first off, you're going to want to go to Old San Juan. This one's pretty obvious. Everybody goes here. This is where the cruise ships come in. It's the part of the city that is the most populated. It has a lot of tourists, and it's the typical city that you think of when you think of what San Juan in Puerto Rico looks like. Colorful buildings, it has street food, street performers, gift shops, the whole 9 yards. It's a great place, lots of energy. I loved this area, but it is a little bit more expensive than the rest of the parts of San Juan. This is also home of the Del Morro, a fortress built in 1539 to protect the island from invaders, and it's also named in honor of King Philip II of Spain. It's a really great place. It will take you a couple hours to walk through the whole thing. It's beautiful. If you love history, this is definitely something that you should do when you're in San Juan. The second thing that I'm going to suggest that you do when you're in Puerto Rico is visit the Window Cave. This is one of the most beautiful sights that you will ever see. It's a cave that's on a top of a mountain, so you're going to kind of hike up this mountain. It's not super hard hike. You'll have a guide the whole way. You'll enter the cave and it'll be almost completely black, but you'll have a flashlight. Everything that you'll need is going to be provided to you from the tour guide. You'll be surrounded by bats the whole time, and the tour guide will take you through this prehistoric landmark. Inside the cave, you're gonna see cave dwellings from ancient people who would hide in this cave for shelter from hurricanes hundreds of years ago. That was one of my favorite parts of this, was to see the cave dwellings. It was absolutely amazing and, so interesting to learn about history that, isn't necessarily typical American history. And it's, older than a lot of the things that we normally learn about in American history. So it was really awesome to see that. When you get to the end of the cave, one of the sides just completely opens up and you'll have this beautiful view of a cliff and, a view from hundreds of miles in the air. You'll be right next to birds flying. You'll see a river below, a beautiful, beautiful sight from inside this cave. To be able to get to this location, you're going to either need to find a driver who's willing to take you or rent a car if you're able to do that. It's about an hour outside of San Juan, which may seem like a hike, but it is absolutely a must-see if you flew all the way to Puerto Rico. You must see this. It's so beautiful. My next suggestion is La Placita. This is a local secret that many people don't get to experience if you're staying in the heart of Old San Juan. So my Airbnb was located about a 10-minute drive outside of Old San Juan, so I wasn't in the heart of the tourist area. I like to not stay in, the heart of the touristy areas if I can help it, because it ends up being a lot more expensive. And I wanted to keep this trip as cheap as possible, so I stayed outside of that. And this is also a really great way to experience life on the island like a local would, because a lot of locals don't live in the touristy areas. So with that combo, I was able to get, the insider secret of La Placita. So La Placita is a nighttime street party. During the daytime, it is a fruit market and, just public street with some restaurants lining it and just like a regular kind of square. During the nighttime, the police block off the street from cars. And what once was a fruit market during the day now becomes small bars. You got a band playing on the streets, people dancing, the nightclubs open up, and it is really just a huge block party. It's a super fun experience. You get a lot of locals to talk to, but you do get some tourists as well trying to experience, authentic Puerto Rican life. So if you do have the opportunity to kind of make your way outside of Old San Juan in the nighttime, try to check out La Placita. It doesn't happen every single night, but definitely through the weekends. I would say I think it's Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night for sure. When I first arrived in Puerto Rico, I had no idea that this was a thing. I actually got the tip from my original Uber driver that had taken me to my Airbnb from the airport. So the best way to find these things is to ask the locals because they know all the fun secrets. So this next thing I'm going to suggest, I am going to butcher the name of it because I'm horrible at my Spanish pronunciation, but I'm going to try my best. I apologize for anybody listening who knows how to pronounce it better, but this next thing is called the Reservoir Natural Cueva de Indio. It's a beach and a hike all in one. This is one of the most interesting beaches that I've ever been to, and I am a little bit hesitant to even call it a beach because it's more of an outlook, because it's not anybody swimming in the ocean in their bathing suits. It's people climbing on all of these rock formations that are formed above the water. So you're going to climb on all of these rocks, and then you can look down in some of the holes that have formed in the rocks, and you see the ocean below you. It's beautiful, and it's been featured in a lot of films, actually. But the rock structures you're standing on is the coolest part. When you walk around, like I said, there's some holes you can look down into, but there's also drawings and imprints from ancient civilizations who also lived here, just like in the caves. So, you're getting history, you're getting a beautiful outlook, you're getting views of the ocean. It's really, the best parts of Puerto Rico all in one. If you're feeling a little bit more adventurous, there are some ladders where you can kind of climb down into the holes to the ocean area, which is a little bit sketchy, I'm not going to lie, but it is a really fun experience. Just make sure you're staying safe. But when you're walking on these rocks and looking out at the ocean, it kind of feels like you're on a totally different planet. It's absolutely amazing. So I really wanted to be able to suggest a beach to go to for my last thing I was going to tell you guys, but I really struggled to pick one because almost every single beach that I went to was more beautiful than the last. It's hard to pick a bad beach when you're on the shores of Puerto Rico. The one thing that I will say regarding beaches is to try to stay away from the beaches lining the resorts because they tend to be lots of tourists. They tend to have people trying to sell you things, and they tend to be a little bit more dirty and have some trash compared to the natural beaches that surround Puerto Rico. So if you can, try to get away from the tourist area and check out the beaches. You're gonna love every single one you go to. I can guarantee it right now.
It's a beautiful day here in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Clear skies and 84 degrees. The high today is 91 and the low is 78. Tonight, there's a chance of showers around 3 a.m., but that will be cleared up by morning. Thanks for tuning in. Back to you, Julianna.
I am joined by my travel buddy and sister, Katherine. Katherine will give us some insight to her favorite and least favorite parts of vacationing on the island of Puerto Rico. Katherine, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, Katherine, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm 19, I go to Westchester, and I'm an English writing major. I love making music and writing poetry, and haven't been really doing anything else recently because of COVID, but...
That's true. So, when did you go to Puerto Rico?
I believe we went 3 summers ago. So it was right after my junior year in high school, I think.
Okay, and that would be 2018?
Yes.
Okay. Where did you stay?
So we stayed in this Airbnb in San Juan. We just had one room in the place, so we shared it with a family, or it was a couple and then one other person.
Okay, did you feel comfortable staying in an Airbnb with strangers that you didn't know?
It was new for me since I don't do this a lot, but I didn't think it was uncomfortable at all because everybody living there was really welcoming and really kind and always invited us to do things, so it wasn't uncomfortable.
Okay. Would you stay in an Airbnb like that again?
Yeah, for sure, definitely.
Okay. So how long were you in San Juan for?
I think we went for 2 weeks.
So you stayed for 2 weeks in San Juan. Prior to getting there, did you budget out what your daily spending was going to be, or was it a full trip budget? How did you go about doing that?
So I didn't have a specific budget that I had for this trip, but we did try to spend like around $50 a day. I think that's like the recommended thing to do. We tried to do that, but I didn't like track it every time. I just had like a good amount of money saved up. So yeah, I don't know exactly how much I spent, but I tried to keep it low, and it was pretty easy in Puerto Rico for us to keep our spendings low daily.
Okay, yeah, that was going to be my next question. Like, do you think that traveling to Puerto Rico is expensive, really cheap? Like, where would you place that?
I think it was cheap for traveling, definitely. A lot of the places were really cheap, especially where we were staying, but when we did go out like to the cities and anywhere like that had more touristy things, obviously like the prices jumped and it was more kind of like still not high-end prices for around here or anything, but still like medium to higher prices once we got to those kind of restaurants. But I'd say if you stayed more in smaller towns or more on the outskirts, it was a lot nicer. I think we got more culture, but it was also cheaper.
Okay, so you like the immersive experience of not being in a tourist section, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, I love that so much more. You get to know the culture, you get to know how the people really act. Whereas when you go to the touristy things, they're advertising for you, they're kind of towards you, and they'll even speak more English. They won't even speak Spanish in those parts, so I feel like it's not really indicative of the entire culture. So I really love, like, even living with someone that's there, or at least being around, and then you get to know kind of their little, like, secrets, the things they actually love to do. Like, they would give us suggestions and everything, and I thought that was really cool. And a lot better to be able to go to, like, little restaurants, or, like, we found this, like, little off-the-road, like, bakery one day, and it had the best sandwiches and, like, the best bread. And I thought that was a lot cooler than just going to something more mainstream that you could go anywhere else.
Right. Yeah, that seems like a lot of benefits. Now, what's something that's not a benefit to staying outside the beaten path? Is there any negatives to that?
I mean, I feel like just as any other place, you are going to get some ruder people, I felt, and like some, I feel like just like the people, but just like any other place, I think, like once you get into like those, they don't want you quite as much sometimes. But I feel like Puerto Rican culture, actually, they did welcome people a lot more, but it was easier to have like bad experiences with people, I guess. But
okay, so if you're staying off the beaten path and you're kind of outside the main city in Puerto Rico, did you feel unsafe?
No, I don't think I felt any more unsafe than maybe being in Philly or like somewhere with, I don't know. I don't think I felt more unsafe than anywhere else here near me. Maybe I feel like more unsafe than when you're in the city, just like anywhere, just because you're surrounded by more people and there's more like lights and everything, so you like feel just generally safer. But I feel like it wasn't worse than around here or anything like that.
Okay, so you felt generally safe the entire trip, or just when you were by your Airbnb?
I feel like I always felt pretty safe. I mean, I wasn't alone.
True.
But I still, yeah, I felt safe, other than like the unsafeness you kind of feel just by unfamiliarity and being in a new place and being around nobody that you know. And also there is a different culture and even like different laws there that you might not know. But as far as like regular travel and how I would feel safe in any new place, I feel like I felt pretty safe.
Okay. And I mean, I think personally that's saying a lot. You were freshly out of high school with little travel experience, and you were able to kind of fully immerse yourself in this culture and feel safe doing so.
Yes, definitely.
Well, that's really great. So can you walk me through an average day on your vacation? Like, what did you do? What did you really love to do throughout your day in Puerto Rico and in San Juan?
I mean, we would try to wake up early, get some breakfast. We always had to shower in the morning, because we were very sweaty in there. And then we would always go, and I remember getting a lot of smoothie bowls, which sounds very, like, mainstream American kind of, but, like, it just definitely was different there, and it was so much better because their fruit is, like, amazing. But we would always try to do something new every day, so we would either go to Old San Juan, or we would go to, like, a neighboring city, or try to go somewhere in nature. So we would always try to do one of those things since we only had limited days. We would try to do one every single day. And I think we might have had like a day in the middle or something where we just kind of chilled where we were. But we did mostly try to do at least one thing, even if that took the full day or if it took like a few hours, and then we would just kind of rest up, and we just walked everywhere a lot. I remember walking to the restaurants near us at night, so once we were done with whatever activity was that day. Yeah. And then we would just, at the end of the day, our Airbnb was super nice, and we could go up to the top and like stand and look over the city a little bit. Not like very high or anything, but it was really nice to like sit on that balcony. So at night I remember like eating dinner late and then going and sitting there, and that would kind of like end cap every night, which was a really nice time.
Right. And I personally think it's really important to find Airbnbs that have those little gems, like a rooftop or a balcony, so you can experience those kinds of things. So in the beginning you mentioned Old San Juan. So can you describe that to me?
Yeah, Old San Juan, Vieja San Juan, I think when you like look it up. It was a city. I mean, it's where like, I think it's like where everyone used to live kind of thing. But it has like city kind of, but not city like we're used to, no like skyscrapers or anything like that. It was very like low buildings. They were all really colorful, which I absolutely love. Like every building, just like regular buildings, all of them were like bright blue, red, orange. That was awesome. And then in Old San Juan, they had the castles, which was really cool. And
Or, I'm sorry, you're referring to the forts, right?
yeah, but they called them castles. Like they're like the Castillo kind of is what the name of all of them are. So yeah, they were like old forts for like war. Mm-hmm. But you could go in a lot of them. So we went on one of those. We even found like an iguana on it. I remember that. Those were really cool. They're so old, older than most anything else we find on like mainland America. Like I'm pretty sure like 1,000 years old or something. Right. So that was really cool to get a lot of the culture, and there was a lot of people there, but there was a lot of tourists there, and like touristy kind of things.
Right, because Old San Juan is where the cruise ships come and dock for the night as well.
Yeah. The families would all be there and like taking pictures with like birds and stuff and doing all the touristy things. So it was more crowded there.
Right. So you mentioned how you did something different or tried to do something different every single day that you were there to get the full experience as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. What was your all-time favorite thing that you did in Puerto Rico?
My favorite thing was, it was a really weird experience. Really something I never like thought would happen exactly the way it did. But we were very lucky. So in our Airbnb there was, I think it was one of their cousins or something living there. So he lived with the people who were the hosts of our Airbnb. And we were texting our Airbnb guy, and we were like, hey, like, we really want to get, like, bus tickets or something to get up to these caves that we really wanted to see. Because it was, like, one of them, like, must-see things when you're there. But it's, like, really far away. You have to go out of all the city stuff and all into nature.
Right.
And it seemed to be really expensive to get bus tickets or taxi or Uber to drive you there. And obviously we had no long-term like transportation. So he told us that the cousin would bring us up in his car and we would just pay him, like, it was really cheap. I think we paid him $200 and there was two of us, which is crazy considering the prices that we would have had to pay. But he also acted as a tour guide, so he came on everything with us, and it actually ended up really, really good. He brought us down. We went to like 3 different things that day. I think we went through a cave tour, we went on to another cave, and then we got to like climb around this thing and like go down these ladders into this underground nature thing too. It was all so cool. And that's the day he brought us to that roadside bakery, so he knew like the little gems there even on our way, and it was amazing food in the middle of nowhere. But my favorite thing on that day was we went to see this cave, and we had to like hike all the way to the cave, and then we got there and we were like with a group. There was bats all in the cave and everything, but you got to the end, I think it was called well, in English, it's like the window cave or so. So when you got to the end, it was just this hole in the cave, and you could look out on this, like, most beautiful landscape ever with, like, trees and bridges and birds, and it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
Right. It kind of reminded me of, like, looking out into, like, Jurassic World.
Yes. That's honestly, that's perfect.
These, like, pristine mountain landscapes, and you're so high up, the birds are flying right next to you. Yeah. So it was very just breathtaking.
Yeah, it was beautiful for so far, and I feel like nowhere that I've ever been is that well kept too. Like, none of it was, like, buildings or anything. It was perfect.
Right. So, that seems absolutely amazing. It sounds like a dream. Mm-hmm. Now tell me what your least favorite part of being in Puerto Rico was.
Honestly, there wasn't anything, like, too bad. But staying in the Airbnb, they didn't have, like, central air conditioning. You just had these windows that you couldn't, like, fully close. It was, like, blinds, like those wooden blinds, but as windows. So, like, the whole window was these giant, like, wooden blinds that you could open and close. So the worst part was it was hot all the time and humid. It was so hot and so humid all the time. And so we would, like, try to open the blinds, and we would get wind in sometimes and stuff, but it was pretty hard to regulate. So pretty much we had to take a shower before bed, after bed, in the morning, we would take so many showers every day because we were just, like, drenched in sweat.
Right.
And if it rained, it was, like, really loud. And also, because of that, so many bugs would get into the room. And we didn't find anything, like, horrible, I don't think. But I had my clothes in, like, this closet next to my bed. And I opened it this one morning, and just a horde of flies came out. And they were all on my, like, clothes and everything.
Right, because they were, like, your old sweaty clothes.
Yeah, so, like, I couldn't even, like, I had to, like, move my bed. It was just horrible. There were so many flies in the room. It was, like, unbearable. And, like, we would get a lot of mosquito bites and everything like that, like, while we were sleeping. So that part really sucked, because we had to, like, spray down with bug spray and everything before bed. And then there was also a rooster that woke us up every single morning at the crack of dawn. So that sucked as well. But right. I feel like all worth it kind of negatives.
Right. So nothing to deter you from going back again.
No, definitely not.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear. You mentioned the roosters, and there was a lot of, wild animals displaced from Hurricane Maria. Did that surprise you?
Yeah, the whole aftermath of the hurricane really surprised me. I guess it shouldn't have, but when you see it firsthand and you're looking at it, it is very surprising. So, like, even where we were when we went on that rooftop, the building right next to us was, like, all caved in, the roof was down, like, everything. So there was a lot when we would walk down the streets, especially near where we were. There wasn't a lot of funding to, like, places like that to fix the damage that the hurricane did. So especially, like, not in the touristy areas, it was really broken down still, since they didn't get to rebuild everything. And yeah, there was a lot of animals on the streets every time, and it was surprising, because you don't find that here.
Well, you don't find that around, the Philadelphia area where we live. Mm-hmm. The destruction from Hurricane Maria, kind of reminded me of the devastation that you see in the suburbs of New Orleans.
Yeah.
Just, poverty and natural disaster.
Yeah, and it was heartbreaking to see.
Right. And did you think that it was still affecting the people that lived there, or was it mostly just, buildings and things?
It definitely affected the people. I mean, I'm sure... I didn't ask them too much about it or anything. But I think, like, a lot of people don't have their homes anymore. So, obviously, so many people are affected. Not only those people, but I'm sure people took people in. So, like, now you're living with your friends or, like, extra family and more mouths to feed. And they were in poverty where we were staying. So it definitely, and I think their emotions, even just like thinking about it, I did hear them talk about it a few times, even unprompted, just like to themselves. So I didn't ask anything, but I think it definitely had a toll on them and the entire community everywhere.
Right. I mean, that's understandable for sure.
Yeah.
So, for somebody who's never been to Puerto Rico before, but after hearing this podcast, hopefully they want to go, what's one thing or, the best advice that you could give somebody who's wanting to travel to Puerto Rico?
Okay, I think the best advice, and I feel like this probably goes to anywhere you go, in my opinion at least, is to do something like we did with the Airbnb so that you can find someone that lives there, a native person of that community, that can suggest things to you or even show you around, because I feel like that was the best places we found. We found the best burritos in the whole world at a restaurant that our Airbnb people suggested to us, and even like neighbors, like people would talk to you a lot there. So anyone, we got the best community event there we got to go to, which was at night. They would all go dancing in the streets, and they would all be drinking and dancing, and the whole street would be blocked off. And I haven't seen anything quite like that in our culture. It was amazing community. And they were all so happy, and it was a tradition like every single night. So all of those things we wouldn't have known about, and our amazing day with all of those things, we wouldn't have gotten any of that without talking to the real people who live there.
Right.
Who are willing to give you that wisdom and advice about their community.
Right, so you're just saying like showing the importance of talking to locals when you're traveling to these places. And I completely agree. I think that's one of the most important things that you can do when you're traveling to a place is talk to the locals. And something really, I think, unique about Puerto Rico in general is their willingness to share their culture. Because you go some places and it's not like that. They kind of want to keep their culture close to them and their families, and they don't want to spread it. And that's reasonable. There's a lot of reasons for that. But you go to Puerto Rico and everybody on the street, every Lyft driver, every, local food stand person is there telling you what's the best thing there. They want to share the culture with you when they realize that you're not native to the area. And that's something that I loved about Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I feel like it might be the same in a lot of Spanish-speaking cultures, because not that I've been to a bunch of them or anything, but I've been to Puerto Rico and Mexico, and both of those places at least had a strong community and a strong desire to share their culture and their community, and I thought that was amazing. They all talked, the only thing we had was the language barrier, so I feel like if we were fluent in their language, we would get even more suggestions and more help, but people were definitely willing and wanting to give us advice and talk about their lives and their culture.
Right. So, let's touch on that language barrier for a second. When you were in Puerto Rico, did you find it very hard to communicate with people?
Sometimes. I feel like that's my best answer. Because it depended where you were. So where we were staying, most everyone around us spoke either only Spanish or very limited English with their Spanish.
Right, because you're outside of old San Juan, which is the main city.
Yes. So it was harder then. I feel like the hardest, and same with Mexico for a lot of these things, the hardest thing was like when we needed to get public transportation. So we would use taxis a lot there. It's a much better way of getting places, I feel like, than even like in cities here, which is a little harder. None of them really spoke English. None of the taxi drivers spoke English. So it was very, very hard because I do have a limited Spanish vocabulary. Definitely not enough to understand them because they spoke a lot faster, obviously, like we do too, than I have ever had to like comprehend. But also I haven't learned things like directions. I literally learned that this semester. So, like, before that, I didn't know all of those directional terms to tell them where we were trying to go. So things like that were difficult. But when you were in the touristy areas, half the time someone would be speaking Spanish in front of us, and then they would look at us and start speaking English instantly. They were all bilingual there, pretty much. They would speak both Spanish and English perfectly. But that was, because it's aimed towards tourists, that makes sense. But yeah, in the other places it was hard with some things. But our Airbnb host did speak English. I think it was a little bit limited, but it was pretty good and perfectly fine to communicate with us. So that was definitely helpful for any, like, questions we had. But it was difficult sometimes, but I don't think it was anything to deter anyone who doesn't even know any Spanish. I think I would just brush up on, like, maybe some of the questions you might have to ask, but we did use a lot of, like, translate and everything, which even helps if you can do the voice. I remember a taxi driver doing it to us and doing the voice recognition. So I don't think it's rude or anything to do anything like that.
Yeah, no, that's pretty common, I think, when pretty much anywhere outside of an English-speaking area to use the, like, Google Translate or something like that. But I always think it's good to kind of brush up on some basic terms. It's always good to know where's the bathroom, things like that.
And I think it's kind of a sign of respect to at least know a little bit of the basics, even if you've never taken a class, just to know, like, how to properly say hello and goodbye and how are you kind of thing, so that even if that's the only thing you're saying in their language, it did go a long way with some people. I remember, because I know some more, like, formal, like, hello and goodbyes or something, and I started, like, saying it like they were to be like, oh, like, a sign of respect, kind of, even if you only know that much.
Right, just trying your best to show your respect for that culture and their language.
Yes.
Yeah, that definitely does go a really far way. Do you ever see yourself going back to Puerto Rico?
I'm not like, oh, I'm 100% gonna be back there, but I would love to if I got the opportunity, or if I want to go to other places, so I think that would be the only reason I wouldn't be going back, just because I want to, if I'm gonna go on another trip, I'd like to go somewhere new that I've never been, and I have hardly traveled, so I have so many places that I could go, so many opportunities. But if someone invited me, or if there was a reason or whatever, or if I had traveled everywhere else I wanted to go, definitely I would go back, because I did love it. Or if I was, like, limited on money, I think, because the flight there wasn't even very expensive. So, like, even taking that into consideration, that if I only have enough money for a more cheaper flight or something, like, I would go back if I was really itching for a trip, I think, and I didn't have, like, a high budget to go to, like, Spain, like, how far away, you know, so, yeah.
Yeah, so it's definitely a budget-friendly place to go, for sure. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, Katherine. I think we learned a lot, and I'm really happy with, all the details that you gave us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Window Seat this week as we explored San Juan, Puerto Rico. Don't forget to tune in next week for our next adventure.